Hi, Cayetano. Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Vamos a esperar un ratito, más o menos until hasta y 10 for everyone else to arrive.
Okay.
Hi, Liliana. Good evening.
Hi, teacher.
Vamos a esperar unos 3 minutos más. So let's wait a little. All right, guys, we're gonna go ahead and start. I think it's just the four of us. Okay, so this week we're going to continue speaking, but we're going to do the fourth type of question, which is also integrated. No sé qué les han dicho sobre este tipo de pregunta, what it consists of.
It's a summary of the lecture.
Exactly. Thank you, Liliana. We just listened to a lecture. No hay que leer nada. It's just a conversation. Oh, sorry, a lecture, and you have to make a short summary. Igual han debido ver la estructura. You introduce the topic, and then you give 2 points mentioned in the lecture. Okay, so we're gonna see those today. Before we start, do you guys have any questions? ¿Alguna duda sobre cómo proceder? All right, if not, we're gonna go ahead and see the examples. Give me 2 segunditos, guys. All right. Okay, same as in last time, you have 30 seconds after you hear the lecture to prepare your response, and then 60 seconds to speak, to give your response. So these are academic lectures. So no sé si hemos visto algunos que ya son más académicos. The language is a little bit more difficult. It's a little bit heavy. So eso tenganlo en cuenta, tengan cuidado con eso. It's very important to pay attention to everything and take notes during the lecture. Igual los mismos consejos de siempre para cuando es listening. Pongan atención a las palabras clave, pongan atención a dónde ponen énfasis, y eso de la estructura also tómenlo en cuenta, porque en el audio igual como que está un poco dividido así. Usualmente van a introducir el tema, and then they're going to give sort of 2 sections in it. So presten atención a eso. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and listen.
Now, listen to part of a lecture in a biology class. Let's talk about 2 kinds of biological selection. 2 different ways that traits are selected in a species of animal as it breeds and reproduces. First, there's natural selection. Here, living things develop features that help them survive in a certain kind of climate, escape from a certain kind of predator, that sort of thing. In contrast, we have artificial selection. Artificial selection happens outside of what we'd call nature. It happens when people deliberately breed living things for their own use. Now, it's true that natural selection and artificial selection both give a living thing the traits it needs to reproduce and survive. But these 2 types of biological selection also have very different effects, obviously. Maybe one of the easiest places to see this difference is with wolves and dogs. Let's start with wolves. So, what's a wolf's job? It's to survive in the wild and get enough to eat, right? So certain qualities are naturally selected. Wolves need keen senses so they can detect prey. They need to be fast, strong, and aggressive to catch their prey, and to survive even in the harshest weather. Wolves that are born with these qualities live longer and pass the qualities on to their pups. That's natural selection. But a dog's job, its role in its environment, is a little different. Dogs don't need to survive in the wild. They need human protection. So to survive, a breed of dog needs to have traits that humans want. Take the golden retriever. People bred a dog big enough to be a good hunter, but not so big that it was hard to control. And it had to be obedient, unlike a wolf, right? A golden retriever has to be, well, friendly in order to be well-liked enough that we humans decide to breed it. So we can get similarly friendly puppies, more pets.
Using points and examples from the talk.
Okay, before we listen to the question, ¿qué tal les ha parecido the lecture? Is there any words, any vocabulary that you didn't understand? ¿Alguna parte de la explicación that was a little confusing? What do you think? Ask, guys. Pregunten porque luego para responder les va a faltar info. So, anything that wasn't clear? All right, so vamos a escuchar la pregunta.
Using points and examples from the talk, explain the two types of biological selection.
Okay, so using points and examples from the talk, explain the two types of biological selection. So, igual siempre hay que prestar atención a qué pide la pregunta. We can use the structure, ¿no? El de introducción, 2 puntos, pero hay que siempre fijar de responder la pregunta. So, a way we could structure it podría ser, since it's asking to explain each type of selection, we could introduce it and then give the first definition, which is natural selection, and the example, que es con los lobitos, with wolves, and then the second example, or the second definition, which is of artificial selection, y dar el ejemplo de los perritos que menciona, ¿no? Eso podría ser una forma de separarlo, or another way could be como lo está en el lecture, ¿no? Dar los conceptos primero, que es biological selection, digo que es natural, que es artificial selection, y luego mencionar los ejemplos de lobitos versus perros. Okay, so eso tómenlo en cuenta. And ahora sí, I'm gonna give you guys some time to prepare your answer, to think about it. 30 seconds. Okay. All right, your 30 seconds to prepare your answer start now. All right. So, Cayetano, would you like to share your response?
Okay, sure.
Dale. All right, so ready?
Yep.
Your 60 seconds start now.
Okay, the topic is about the biological selection that is provide to the animals to survive in different environment, habitats, and basically continue live in this world. The professor said that we have two types of selection, natural and artificial. Natural selection talk about that the natural select the best animal to survive in order to live a wild environment, the predators. In this case, the professor said that the wolves, they need a strong body because they live in the wild, and to be aggressive, fast, and longer in order to get the animals to eat. On the other hand, we have the artificial selection that is like a dog that was domesticated for humans, and they need humans to live.
All right. Thank you, Cayetano. Regarding time, you extended a little bit longer than the 60 seconds. And, a ver, ahorita lo vamos a desmenuzar. Regarding the introduction, mentioning everything at the beginning, yes, I think it was todo en orden. The time was good. El manejo de tiempo was dentro de los primeros 15 segundos. The problem was, I think, in the first example. You extended the first example a little too long. The information was all present. So, entonces no era que faltaba información o que estaba equivocada, but it was a little longer and it didn't leave much time for the second part, which was mentioning artificial selection and lo de los perritos and blah, blah, blah. So, y eso era igual, porque la pregunta pide that we explain the difference or we explain the two types. So era importante mencionar también el segundo. So es un cacho medir el tiempo. That's the only suggestion I would make. managing your answers to be a little bit more concise, un poquito más concisos, and also the speed at which you speak. It wasn't slow, pero I would amp up the pace un poquito, le subiría un poquito la velocidad to that at which you speak. Okay, so thank you, Cayetano. All right, one more answer for this one. Joaquin, would you like to give it a try?
Okay, teacher.
All right, te pongo un minuto. And your 60 seconds start now.
Okay, and the lecture talk, the teacher talk about two types of biology selections, and that consist in natural selection and the animals and survive in the wild by themselves. The example that the teacher says is a wolf to survive in the forest, and the other type of selection is the artificial selection. This selection consists in the human attention. And the example that the teacher explained is a dog who needs human attention, food, and other things.
All right, ¿hay algo más que quieras añadir? All
No,
right.
teacher.
Dale. Thank you, Joaquín. Que lo veremos por partecitas. First off, igual un detallito de una palabra. You mentioned that the lecture was about two types of biology selection. Now, the correct word would be biologicals. Igual siempre pueden buscar en la pregunta. A veces la pregunta misma has the answer in it, or has the words you need to structure your answer. So eso, instead of biology, biological. And igual, I like that you use all the keywords. So I could tell you paid attention to everything that was important, all the words that were important in the text. But a little bit sería estructurar las oraciones. Not the structure of the whole answer, which was very good, but the actual sentences themselves, cada oración, creo que falta un poquito working on the structure. And yeah, I think the second concept, el de artificial selection, you could have explained it a little bit better. There was a key word there, which was deliberate. ¿No? Una parte importante sobre este tipo de selección biológica es que es a propósito, no es artificial, tiene acción humana de por medio. So that's an important difference. So mentioning that little bit, you did mention the humans, you know, how dogs are dependent on humans, pero aclarar que es eso, como que los humanos intervienen en la selección. But yes, not all the information was there. Solo por cuestión de tiempito, yo hubiera extendido un poco menos la primera y un poco más la segunda. Thank you, Joaquin. All right. We're going to go on to the next example. Okay, same thing. ¿Qué tal han sentido el lecture, like the listening itself? ¿Les ha parecido muy difícil o como que había vocabulario así que parece un poco muy pesado? So? Okay, and this one was bueno, no sé, maybe si su área es biología o medicina, lo pueden cachar un poco más fácil, pero in general, I think people have difficulty con términos muy así científicos, muy de física, muy de química, muy de biología. So, sí, se entiende that those are kind of medio dolor de cabeza de cachar, pero es posible. So we're going to go ahead and listen to.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a physical science class.
So, in the early 20th century, there was this big debate going on in the scientific community. Did very small stuff like electrons behave like particles? Or did electrons, these negatively charged things that whirled around the nucleus of the atom, did these electrons actually behave like something else? Well, for a long time, it was assumed that because electrons were discrete, because electrons seem to be individual objects with specific energy levels, for a long time, it was assumed that electrons were simply small particles. But then the double slit experiment happened. In the double slit experiment, electrons are shot at a screen containing two long vertical holes. The positions of the electrons after they go through the screen are captured on film. Now, experimenters expected that the results of the experiment would be simple because, well, they thought that electrons were like small particles. They guessed that the electrons that went through the two slits would create a pattern of two narrow bands, or lines, on the film. However, this is not at all what the experimenters saw. Instead, they were shocked that the electrons formed an interference pattern, one by one, on the film. Now, in other words, the electrons randomly scattered all over the film in a wave-like pattern, instead of collecting in two narrow bands and creating the pattern that particles would make. So, the double slit experiment was significant because it forced scientists to rethink the nature of electrons. They realized that electrons, like light, have characteristics of both particles and waves. Like particles, they collected one by one on the film, but like waves, they formed a complex interference pattern on the film instead of forming two neat lines. And the results of the experiment, well, they're discussed, debated, and reproduced to this day.
Okay, before we listen to the question, how did you, ¿qué tal han sentido ese? Did you understand everything?
For me, it's a little more hard.
Yeah, like I was saying, physics, chemistry, all that stuff, it's a little harder. So see, this one is a little bit more complicated. Maybe something in particular, algo en específico que les haya costado. Vocabulary words, maybe estos términos muy específicos que usa, because this one uses a lot of like nombres de nombres científicos, nombres de experimentos. ¿Eso les quedó claro? Or So before we answer, como tenemos tiempo para ver todo con más calmita, vamos a ver algunas de las palabras clave that he mentioned and some of the names of the scientific phenomenons as well. Okay, so he mentions, a ver, palabras clave que podemos mencionar. First, what are we talking about? ¿De qué estamos hablando in general?
Electrons.
Electrons and particles, and it's an experiment they did to determine if electrons act like particles, right? So palabras clave, electrons, particles that we're talking about. This experiment that they did to determine how they behave. ¿Qué se llamaba el experimento? Do you remember? No, it was called the double slit experiment. Se los escribo en el chat. Este igual es importante porque este pedacito, porque la segunda mitad extiende todo sobre cómo funcionó este experimento. The double slit experiment. So el nombre de esta cosa would be very important in your answer. El nombre de esta macarita. Then he explains how it works, cómo ha sucedido este experimento. Did you guys understand that part? ¿Han entendido cómo funciona, cómo ha sucedido, digamos?
They used a screen.
Mhm.
And they were able to see how the structure of the electron was. Something like
Yes, exactly. So igual, I'm not a physicist. I don't really know much about exact science, pero basta con que captemos eso. No, they saw the formation the particles made when they went through the screen or through the slits. No, slit es como un huequito, una ranura. So veían dónde caían las partículas cuando iban por la ranurita. Las dos ranuritas. Double slit, por eso se llama así. And ¿cuál es el resultado? What did they find? The pattern es igual, palabra clave. The pattern was a... Do you remember the word?
The electrons form an interference pattern.
Yes, exactly. That was the word. Es igual, es importante porque ya nos dice el resultado. So the interference pattern. And yes, con esas palabras clave, with the name of the experiment, kind of how it works, and the name of the result, ya pueden armar su respuesta. ¿O sienten que les falta todavía algo de info? ¿Algo que no estaba claro? Okay, so if everything is clear now, todos esos conceptos, todo eso aclarado, we're going to listen to the question.
Using points and examples from the talk, describe the double slit experiment and explain why the professor thinks that it is significant.
Okay, so igual, siempre hay que buscar responder lo que pide la pregunta. So in this case, we have to explain the experiment and why the professor thinks it's significant. At the end, he says, esto es importante porque ta, 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 ta. So, eso, guys. I'm going to give you guys 30 seconds to prepare. Starting now.